Welcome to Milwaukee County Parks Bumblebee Monitoring Program. If you haven't already, please see our other videos on the monitoring program and submitting data to the Wisconsin Bumblebee Brigade. This video presents a brief tutorial on identifying bumblebee species found in Milwaukee County. This is basically a crash course that covers major tips on bumblebee identification, but is in no way comprehensive. And thank you to the Wisconsin Bumblebee Brigade, which has organized and developed the resources for IDing bumblebees and verifies all the photo submissions. Being familiar with basic anatomy is key to identifying bumblebees. Bees are divided into three segments: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. For the head, the color of the face and the vertex can be crucial to identifying bumblebee species. And sometimes the size of the eyes can come in handy too for specific species ID. The thorax is the middle section of the bee, and this is where the legs and wings attach. Look at the coloration and pattern of the thorax to help identify species. The abdomen is divided into segments called terga, so these different T segments here. Workers, which are females, have 6 terga or T segments, with the final one coming to a point. And males have 7 of these T segments, with the final one being more rounded. You can see that a little bit in this photo here. Looking at the different colors on these T segments is often the first things observers will cue into to distinguish between different bumblebee species. So you can see the tricolored bumblebee pictured here. It's easily identified by the deep orange color on T2 and T3. The diagram to the left shows in detail the differences between male and female bumblebees. Males have one more abdominal segment than females, and they also have an additional antennal segment. Usually doesn't come in too handy for the type of photo IDs that we do here, but you never know. You can see the difference in the leg shape between males and females as well. Females are going to have this pollen basket or corbicula, so it's going to be this slightly concave area that is used to carry and transport pollen back to the nest. And you can note how it juts out a little bit, unlike the male leg here, which is a little narrower and more rounded. Then we've got the size guide to the right here. It's specifically for the rusty patch bumblebee, so not all bumblebees fit these size specifications, but it illustrates how for all species the queens are going to be larger than the workers and the drones. Here are some close-ups to show you the presence or absence of pollen baskets. The bee to the left is a drone or male, so you can see that he doesn't have a pollen basket on his hind leg. And I also want to mention that cuckoo bumblebees are a different species of bumblebees that also lack pollen baskets. They are a special type of bumblebee that act as nest parasites, and so they have no need to gather their own pollen to bring back to the nest. The middle bee is a worker, and she's just starting to gather pollen. You can see the little bits of accumulation of yellow pollen on the basket there. And you can also see the subtle but distinct shape of that pollen basket. And the bee to the right is clearly a worker. She's carrying full pollen load in her baskets. So here's some species that you should try not to get fooled by that can look similar to bumblebees or can even go masquerading as them. Honeybees are generally going to be thinner looking than bumblebees and have less hair. Carpenter bees are going to have this really shiny abdomen, and that's the best way to distinguish them from bumblebees. Even though wasps may have the same characteristic black and yellow striping as bumblebees, you can cue into that trademark wasp waist to identify these, and also note the lack of thick hair. Flies are going to have a single pair of wings instead of 2, and they have large eyes and small antennae. If they sit for you long enough, you may even be able to see them rub their front legs together in that characteristic way shown in this photo here. Mining bees can be a little tricky to tell apart from bumblebees some of the time. The best way is that you can look at their hind leg and you can see that they don't have corbiculae like bumblebees do. They have what's known as scopae. So instead of these concave pollen baskets, they have these long hairs as their structures to collect pollen. Let's compare and contrast some of the basic features of these bees. To distinguish female and male, we already discussed how you can count the abdominal segments. Look at the thorax patterns. Is there a small black spot like in the brown belt here on the thorax? Is there more of this T shape? There might be a band that extends right to the wing pads, or it might be a little more broad going just to the wing pads. You might have more of a baseball diamond shape in some instances, or perhaps the majority of the thorax is black. Face and vertex coloration are a really solid way of distinguishing between species, as well as between males and females. Probably the first thing that most people cue into in the coloration of the bees is their abdomen. A segment might be a solid color all the way across, or it might have black on the edges with a brownish half circle, as is the case of the brown-belted bumblebee. Some species have different color morphs. So for instance, the red-belted bumblebee has this red color morph, the most easily identifiable, but it's also got a dark color morph shown here. And we're going to go into this in more detail coming up. If you want to get really in-depth, some additional features you can look at are face shape or cheek length, eye size, and hair length. If you want to get more information on these characteristics, you can visit the Wisconsin Bumblebee Brigade website and look at the profiles for each species. As of 2019, there have been 10 species of bumblebees documented in Milwaukee County parks. The four most abundant are the common eastern, the red-belted, the brown-belted, and the two-spotted. Also found in our park system is the rusty patch, the yellow, the half-black, the black and gold, the lemon cuckoo, and we did have a single instance in 2018 of the northern amber being found in our park system. So now we'll cover each species individually, and for each species I'll show you a slide with the female and the male bumblebee, as well as a photo of that species. And then in the next slide I'll show you similar looking species for that bumblebee. For the common eastern, the first abdominal segment, T1, is going to be yellow, with the rest of them being all black. The vertex is always going to be yellow, and for females there's going to be a black face and a yellow face for males. Common easterns are pretty easy to get an accurate ID, but you do want to make sure that you get a good look at the back and sides to see that there's only yellow on the T1 segment. The two-spotted is going to have those two spots that kind of look like a W shape on T2, and sometimes they can be obscured by the wings, so you want to make sure that you get that good back shot. Then the half-black is going to have yellow on the T2 segment as well, so just making sure that you're able to distinguish the first from the second abdominal segment. Red belts can be a source of frustration for many bumblebee observers. They are highly variable in their color patterns and can be mistaken for plenty of other species. The vertex is generally yellow, and it depends whether or not they have a black or a yellow face. The thorax has a black band that extends to about where the wings attach. Sometimes it can fall a little short, and sometimes it can extend a little past. But do take note that red-belted queens can have a smaller size patch on their thorax rather than this broad spotter band. The red morph is most recognizable with the reddish-orange in the middle of the abdominal segments, yellow on the top ones, and black towards the bottom. And the dark morph has yellow on the first couple segments with black on the remainder. So these are all different examples of red-belted bumblebees, showing just how variable this species really is. Red belts have many morphs, or those visually distinct-looking varieties, so naturally it's easy to confuse them with many species. So once again, look for that broad oval band on the thorax that extends to about the wing pads. Here's the brown-belted bumblebee. They have a yellow T1 and an orange-brownish half-moon on T2, with the rest of the abdomen being black. They have a small black circle surrounded by yellow on the thorax. You can see some balding on this older female bee right here. She's got this shiny patch in the middle of the thorax, so you can see that she's worn away some of that hair there. She's a little more haggard looking. So it makes it look like the patch on the thorax is larger than it would be for maybe a fresher bee. You can see that females have a black vertex and a black face, while males have yellow vertices and yellow faces. Brown belts can be confused with two-spotteds, rusty patches, and red belts. So make sure that you get a clear view of T2 to see if you have a brown belt. And I do want to note that sometimes the brown belt can actually have that same half-moon shape, but it can be yellow. Not super common, but it does happen. So in that case, to distinguish it from the two-spot, make sure that you see this distinct W shape. The rusty patch is going to have a bit different of an orange color, a little more rusty orange than the more muted brownish orange color of the brown belt. And then you're also going to see that below this rusty patch you're going to have that little bit of yellow versus the black on the sides and below for the brown belt. And then we've got this highly variable red belt, which will often but not always have a broader band on the thorax, so you'll make sure that you look at that a lot of the time. And then you'll lack that brown semicircle on T2 for the red belt. Here's the two-spotted bumblebee. They have a fully yellow T1 and a black T2 with two yellow spots on it forming this W shape. Two spots are going to have a yellow vertex, with females having a black face and males a yellow one. The two-spot can be confused with the common eastern and brown-belted if you don't get a good look at T2, so do your best to capture an image of that. And I do have this picture of a queen two-spot here, just to show that sometimes the W can be a little more subtle on certain bees rather than others. The rusty patch's first two abdominal segments are yellow with a rusty colored patch in the middle of the T2 segment. Females have a black vertex and face, and males have a yellow vertex and a black face. And queens are similar to workers, but they don't have the rusty patch, with the T2 being completely yellow instead. The rusty patch can be confused with brown belts and half blacks, so look for subtle differences in color between the rusty patch and the brown belt, and that shape of that half moon. Do the same color check on the T2 to distinguish the rusty patch from the half black, and keep in mind that those rusty patch queens lack the iconic rusty patch, and so they can be mistaken for half black bumblebees if you don't look carefully. So what you want to look for is that yellow vertex of the half black to set it apart from the rusty patch queen. Yellow bumblebees have mainly yellow abdominal segments with only the bottom couple being black, and the thorax has a wide black band across it. Males and females both have black vertices and black faces. Yellows can be confused with American, northern ambers, and occasionally red-belteds. Certain morphs of red belts have yellow extending far down the abdomen, like the yellow bumblebee, but notice how the red belt has these intermixed black and yellow hairs that can set it apart from the solidly yellow hairs of the yellow bumblebee. The American bumblebee is going to have a bigger black patch on the thorax than the yellow bumblebee, and the T1 is not going to be fully yellow. And for the northern amber, you're going to look at the yellow vertex and face, and also keep in mind that in Milwaukee County Parks we only had that single observation in 2018. This really is more of a northern species that we don't get here that often. Half-blacks are generally smaller bumblebees with a completely yellow T1 and T2. They have a small black spot on the thorax, and the vertex is yellow, with females having a black face and males a yellow one. The half-black is another species that can be a little tricky to ID. It can be confused with the red-belted, rusty patch queens, and the aptly named confusing bumblebee. Looking at the thorax is a good place to start with this species. Half-blacks usually have a small black spot, while red belts often have a larger oval, and the confusing bumblebees will have a completely yellow thorax, or a thorax with just a small black keyhole spot in it a lot of the time. The hair of the confusing bumblebee is often an amber yellow, which distinguishes it from the half black some of the time, which is more of a standard yellow, or maybe you'd say more of a canary yellow. And once again, we don't have documentation of any confusing bumblebees in the park system, but we would love to find some. Black and golds are larger bumblebees with black wings. They have yellow T2 and T3 segments. Sometimes the T1 segment can be part yellow and part black, with the remainder of the segments being black. They have large black bands along the thorax. And females will have a black face and males yellow, with both having a yellow vertex. And then note the enlarged eyes on the male of this species. Black and golds can be confused with the American bumblebee, another species that we don't have documentation of in the park system, but we're keeping our fingers crossed. You're able to differentiate the black and gold by its yellow vertex. Lemon cuckoos have a yellow vertex and black face for males and females. Females will have a fully yellow thorax or just a small black dot on it, and a mostly black abdomen with a yellow band midway down. And female cuckoo bumblebees will not have pollen baskets. Males have a black spot or patch on their thorax that can sometimes look like a baseball diamond shape. And T1 through T3 are yellow or intermixed yellow-black, with the remaining segments being all black. Male lemon cuckoos can be confused with red belts and half-blacks. Lemon cuckoo males don't have the enlarged eyes that red belts have, so that can be a good distinguishing feature. To distinguish male lemon cuckoos from half-blacks, look for the black face of the lemon cuckoo. Northern ambers for males and females will have a yellow face and a yellow vertex. They'll have a broad black band along the thorax, and the majority of their abdominal segments will be yellow, with the bottom couple or few being black. Look for the yellow face and vertex to distinguish this species from the American and yellow bumblebees. The American bumblebee is a species that's in decline. We haven't found it in any of our park systems, but like I said, we're keeping our fingers crossed. In Wisconsin, this bee is at the northernmost part of its range. American bumblebees have black vertices and faces and a long black band across the thorax. Females have yellow T1 through T3, and males also have yellow T4 and 5s. The American bumblebee can be confused with the black and gold bumblebee, so look for the black vertex on the American to distinguish these species. If you want more ID practice, there are a number of places you can go to. The B3 website is hands down the first place you should check out. Simply click on the Resources tab at the top of their website for a wealth of information. The links next to the blue arrows are quizzes you can take to hone your ID skills. If you join us for the Parks Bumblebee Monitoring Orientation, we will have a practice ID session using photos of bumblebees found within our park system. Bumblebees of North America is a great book I recommend for ID purposes too. They have detailed drawings of the different morphs of each species of bumblebee. And if you're on Facebook, the Wisconsin Bumblebee Observers page can be a good way to practice ID. Once you begin submitting your observations to the B3 website, you can review the comments B3 leaves you. If you enter a species incorrectly, they will helpfully explain to you the details as to why they have changed that species ID. If you have any questions or would like to know more about the Milwaukee County Parks Bumblebee Monitoring Program, please contact parkscomsci@milwaukeecountywisconsin.gov.